What's up, everyone? Today I'm going to talk to you about the video games that I want to make, because I have spent a lot of time in the past just working on, once I get to the point where I want to start making video games, what am I going to do to get myself into situations where I am making games as often as possible? Because obviously you could go to college, get a degree in game development, get some job with a game developer, but really, you're putting off the point where you start making games for money. Ideally, you just make the games. And you just keep doing that over and over and over again. And that act of game creation puts you in a position where you understand them inside out and you know how to get results. So what I have to figure out is how to get myself into that position, right? That's what I'm working on now. And one of the reasons I'm moving back into the States and the YouTube channel and participating in game jams and getting more involved in game communities has a lot to do with that. But that's a separate thing. What I'm going to be talking to you today is I'm going to talk to you about, about the games that I want to make. And first I'm going to be talking about my inspirations, because the game you see in the background right now, Perfect Dark, this is my absolute favorite game of all time, just because it was just so far ahead of itself. It blows my mind how many different features were available in this game. So, for those of you who don't know, this game was developed by a company called Rare. They also made GoldenEye, which was a very popular game on the Nintendo 64. And we're talking about a time period in video game history where the first-person shooter wasn't really that much of a thing yet. There were shooters, obviously, but it had not by any means become a mainstream thing, right? And there are people, I feel this way. I'm not saying this is true. Obviously, people will disagree with me. But there are people who feel that GoldenEye and games like Perfect Dark in that era really set the standard for what a first-person shooter was. And this is back when they were on a Nintendo 64, right? So you had the weird control stick, and it was before dual analog sticks that became the standard of the video game industry, right? So this game, let me just scratch the surface a little bit on some of the history of this game. So, Perfect Dark was developed by Rare, which is the company that made GoldenEye for the Nintendo 64. But Perfect Dark isn't like GoldenEye 2, but you can think of it that way. Imagine that a company made a video game and then took everything that they learned from that video game and made a better version of it. That is what Perfect Dark is to GoldenEye. It runs better. Every single weapon in this game has a secondary fire mode, right? Where you can hold down B and the weapon does something different. That blew my mind as a kid. Like, GoldenEye did not have that. Like, okay, this pistol that I'm using in the background here, I'm not playing right now, obviously. This is a video playing in the background. That you can have a secondary mode where it's a melee weapon, right? And that's a pretty basic secondary mode. Most of the other secondary modes are like quite unique and different. Like, there's an assault rifle where you can use the secondary mode and throw the assault rifle, and it turns into a proximity mine. And so here I just went to disarm, right? Punches have a secondary mode where you can one punch and you take away the enemy's weapon. And it took me years to understand how powerful that is. Disarm in this game is probably one of the most useful weapons that you have access to, because it immediately takes away the weapon of your opponent, and especially if you had trouble aiming in this game, that's huge because it buys you more time to hide behind cover and all that kind of stuff, right? It's just, it's absolutely fantastic. But my point here is Perfect Dark completely blew my mind. Not only was it just better, right? The storyline was interesting. It drew you in, and it was captivating. It also had co-op. This game came out in 2000, and it had cooperative play of the main storyline missions, right? Which is like, what? Halo does that, but Halo was later. This is crazy, absolutely crazy, because I guess, honestly, to a lot of people, Halo is probably the definitive FPS, or maybe Counter-Strike. That's really a topic that people would argue and debate about. But my point this game has so much. And not only does it have cooperative, but it also has counter-operative, where one person is trying to beat the level, and the other person is working with the enemy to kill them and stop them from winning. And that's just, like, that's crazy, okay, that it had co-op and counter-operative in 2000, and that's just the surface, okay. It also had a challenges mode, and there were like 40 different challenges, and they start off really, really simple, and as you keep progressing, the challenge is more complicated. They're all simulations where you're fighting against enemies, but then, like, okay, on some of them, the enemies have rockets and it's in slow motion. Or on other ones, it's one-hit kill and there's silenced weapons only. And sometimes, for every player that you play with, there's only one other NPC. Where other times, for every player you play with, there's 2 other NPCs. Because again, with challenges, you could do it cooperatively. So you could do these challenges alone, or you could play it with up to 4 people with a specific goal that wasn't just basic, like, fighting against each other. Because GoldenEye, remember, GoldenEye did not have bots in the multiplayer. When you played multiplayer, you had to play against other people you knew. And there was nobody else there. Perfect Dark has robots that you can play against. So you can play against 2 or 3 other people and bots. And that was not a thing at the time. And there are so many things that this game did that were just so ahead of its time. It is remarkable. And I just, like, I don't think any game that I have such a close, strong emotional attachment to. And I think one of the reasons that I feel that way is also the circumstances that I come across this game. Because it's a Nintendo 64 game, there's a recurring theme in my life where I come across a Nintendo 64 and someone has a copy of Perfect Dark, right? Like, I'm in Nicaragua right now, and one of my roommates just got a Nintendo 64 for her birthday that has a copy of Perfect Dark. So every time I get a chance, I play it through, and it's just, oh, I absolutely love the way that I failed an objective. Huh. I love the way that it just is. It's such an amazing game, and it has inspired me so much that I want to develop a game inspired by this game. And so now I'm going to get more into my thoughts on that project, and that project is I refer to it as 00. So I know that this particular moment on the screen right now, where you have a silenced weapon, especially pistols, and you feel like you are like a badass spy, and you have to do something quickly, that I want to really get. Because the cool thing about Perfect Dark is that the levels, even when you're playing on the hardest difficulty, all of the levels are pretty quick. Once you do it right, you beat the level in 5 to 10 minutes. The levels don't last longer than that. The learning part, when you're playing on the higher difficulties, is about learning exactly where everything is and being able to predict it. And that's what gives the illusion of you being badass, because it's like, you know where everything is. And that gives you an edge over time that you can just, like, it just gives such great flow. Like, once you've beat a level a couple times, you can play it again over time, like years later. And what you find is that games like this actually become more fun the more that you've played them. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you can just sit down and play a game like Perfect Dark for like 40 hours a week and not get bored of it. You definitely will, but my point here is that later on in life, you will revisit the game, and it becomes more and more fun because you become more and more talented as an individual. And in modern times, this is also true for games like Dark Souls and other games that have a steep difficulty curve that forces you to slow your mind down and make decisions and not rush. And that's really things I want to keep in mind when I'm developing my video game. And something that I wish I could show you right now, actually, is that Perfect Dark had a training range. So you can literally, like, okay, I don't know if you ever played the game Fable, but in Fable, they tried to, like, in one of the Fable games, they tried to do away with menus. So normally when you press start, it pauses the game and there's text, right? In Fable, when you press start, you get teleported to a room and you can walk around the room and interact with it. And that's what represents menus and that kind of thing. So the video just ended. So I'm showing a video from my other channel which I did as an experiment called Gully Games. But I'm just going to keep having Perfect Dark stuff running in the background. But I think what I'm going to do now actually is training range. I don't have any. I need to get. I need to do a video about the training range in Perfect Dark, because you can like when you start the menu, you can just press start, and it takes the menu away, and you're in a building, and then that building that you're in Perfect Dark is your intelligence agency's like headquarters, right? So you can explore that building and go to training areas or go to a shooting range where you can practice with all of the weapons that you've found in the storyline or in the challenges. And each weapon has 3 levels of kind of challenges that you can beat, and it teaches you how to use the weapons, and it's just absolutely fascinating. And it really has inspired me that I understand now, if I wanted to create a shooter that really thrives off of this, like, you can play it in short sessions, because I think I would want to do this for a mobile game. So obviously there's issues with the controls that I'd have to work around, but that's where my heart tells me that I would want to do this as a mobile game. And the starting point would be pretty simple, because all I would have to do to begin to create the game is to make a shooting range. I just need to make a shooting range where there are targets and different guns and different like levels, right, where there's timing. So okay, for this level you have to get like this many points within this many seconds using this much ammo, right? And then from that point I killed her. Why did I do that? From that point you'll then be able to, you know, progress through the shooting range, yada yada. It's very, very simple, but my point is that it would be simple to create, and then once I've created that, that doesn't have to be the game. That can just be the beginning of what leads to the thing that creates the game. Just like in Perfect Dark, there is a shooting range, but you can play the whole game through and have no idea that the training range even exists, because you have to go explore to find it, right? And it's by no means a main part of the game, but it is a part that's there. And I think that instead of trying to create levels, and instead of trying to do all of that, what I would really... The best starting point for this is simply to make a training range and have really basic something like, okay, you have to hit these 3 targets. Hit these 3 targets within 20 seconds. Did you do it? Okay, you succeeded. Did you not? You failed. Next level. Like, that's really simplistic. And I'm not saying that's super easy. To somebody who knows what they're doing, they could do that really quickly. But for me, like, obviously, I am not a programmer. I have to learn about these things. But I won't learn unless I place myself in situations that expose me to large amounts of information and regular engagement with programming. And so that's why I think the YouTube channel is really important. And also thinking about starting points for how do I get myself to a point where I am working on this on a regular basis. Because so far that I've spent a lot of time thinking about things and like even designing things, writing stuff down, documenting things. And playing games, honestly, because there was a point in my life where I stopped playing video games because I just felt like they weren't bringing good things into my life, and, you know, people were judging me. And then I realized, you know, I want to create games. I absolutely know that is what it for me represents so much as a medium. I know you can do absolutely anything through video games. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And because I'm so sure about that, I have to be playing games. I have to be playing as many games as possible. I have to expose myself to games that really, like, they get me thinking, and they get me like, oh, that's a cool feature. I really like how this developer chose to handle this subject. And it really, like playing Perfect Dark, for example, right? It may be viewed as something that's a waste of time to some people, but for me, this is literally product research. Playing this game, getting better at it, really understanding what made this game enjoyable is going to increase my ability to actually be able to replicate it myself, right? And I'm not saying I just want to copy Perfect Dark, but I definitely want to understand this game inside and out so that when I make a game inspired by this game, that I can do it really, really, really well. And so now I've shared more about 00, so there's a little bit more about the game itself, but now I'm going to get into stuff that I'm not too sure about. We're talking about directions that the game could take. take, right? So first off, I know that I'm going to start by making a training range. I know that getting myself into the life situations where I'm around people who develop games and I'm working with game developers, that's key to making these games, right? I know all that. That's certain. The thing that's not certain is the direction that the game itself might take. Because, for example, like I want to do this on mobile. So I have to figure out the control scheme for a shooter on mobile. And the reason I want to do this on mobile is because the format of playing these missions is perfect for mobile. Mobile games do very well when you can play around for just a couple minutes, right? And then you could just keep trying over and over again. Because in this video and the videos that I've been showing you, I'm not dying that much, but that's because I died over and over and over and over and over again and just kept practicing and trying again and again and again and again and again. And so that's another thing that I want to work on, is finding ways to make, like, I don't want the game to be perceived as hard, even though you'll have to keep retrying. I want there to be some kind of system that allows you to just reiterate the same parts over and over again, but in a way that doesn't interrupt your game flow. And so, for example, like say that you're trying to, you beat level 1, now you're trying to beat level 2, but there's a certain part where you keep dying. You know, I would experience a loss of my flow when I was playing that. And if losing your flow is when you feel you are immersed in a game, you're not really thinking about other things, you are in the game, and then suddenly something happens and you're not in the game as much anymore. You don't feel that connection. You're frustrated, or you start to be too hungry, or somebody is like trying to get your attention, right? Those are examples of things that would break your flow. The goal as a game developer is to maintain a consistent state of flow, basically. So I would experience a break in flow when I would fail these missions, even though failing the mission over and over again was a necessity to success. And that's a mistake that most games make. I believe that there's ways to work around that and to present the game in a way that it teaches you how to play it without feeling like you fail over and over again. Because you are failing, but you don't necessarily know that you're failing. And the way to do that is to make sure that every time you do something, it matters in some permanent way. For example, with a game like GoldenEye or Perfect Dark, this happens abstractly, because when you progress, like let's say it's a 5-minute mission and you get 3 minutes through it and then you die, you didn't gain anything in the game. There's no stat that it records that gives you a benefit. You're not getting any more experience. There's no physical thing in the game that's making you progress or feel that sense of progression. The thing that is giving you that sense of progression is that you now have learned something about the game, you've observed a pattern that you didn't notice before, and now you can replicate, you can change your actions so that you have a more positive outcome. But ideally, the game gives you something. And so that's why I believe that what would work really well is a mobile FPS game that is combined with, it has short play sessions, but is combined heavily with RPG elements. So this means that, like, maybe you start out with really basic weaponry, and then you become more, like, you gain access to new weapons or new levels and that kind of stuff, right? And so every time that you play, even if you fail the level, you don't beat it, you are gaining something physical. Like you're gaining money for every enemy that you took down based on your accuracy. There's some kind of physical incentive within the game that gets recorded even if you fail, right? That's really important. But also, let me get to another thing that breaks flow, and that's when you have one part that you're stuck on. And so in a linear game, this is a common problem. So what I think would be good is if you can always play up to 3 missions that you haven't beaten yet, and that the game would encourage you, instead of doing, like, let's say that there's mission 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, right? First, you can play the first 3 missions. As soon as you beat one of those, you can play an additional mission. Okay? So you only have to beat 1 to progress, but maybe it would get to a certain point where you have to beat like 2 to progress. The point's that you should always be able to try a different thing instead of failing at the same thing over and over again. And this is because the way that our brains work as humans if we have a problem and we keep trying over and over again, when we don't get results, we become less efficient at finding the solution to the problem. So you can work around this by resetting the problem and moving on to another problem as soon as you start to become redundant. And I haven't articulated this particularly well, so let me bring it back to video games. In a video game, imagine that you're stuck on level 2, and you're stuck on a specific part of level 2. Traditionally, you have to just keep doing it over and over and over again. But what would be ideal is that after you fail once on level 2, then the game automatically loads like the other campaign or the other mission to progress, right? So it loads a different level, right? And then you get to a certain point in that level and you can't beat it. And it restarts, and then it moves back to the other level. So you're not redoing the same thing twice. That is something that if death isn't as punishing, it does change something in the game, but if it resets it and takes you somewhere else, I think that could go really well. I'm not completely sure, but it's definitely possible, and this is something that would need a lot of experimentation. And also now we're getting into the whole like, okay, do I want to do a spy-like game like GoldenEye or like Perfect Dark or GoldenEye, or do I want to do some kind of fantasy-based game? What if instead, I definitely want to do an FPS, but what if instead of an FPS it was like you were a spy, but you were a spy in like a mythological like dragon fantasy kind of era, where obviously they would still have these kind of people who infiltrate castles and that kind of thing and are really highly trained to you know, kill efficiently and be stealthy and all that. But instead of using guns, they're using like arrows and magical spells and their fists and that kind of thing, right? So that's another direction that I might take simply because of my future interests. So I've discussed 00 with you guys, but now I also need to talk to you about Footsteps and the final destination or the final goal of my video game development, the ultimate dream of it, okay? So Footsteps is an RPG. 00 is an FPS. That doesn't mean that they're going to be traditional by any means, right? Like 00 may be in a fantasy setting. What I know about Footsteps is I want Footsteps to be in an RPG fantasy setting. Footsteps is just going to be like my version of a good single player RPG. That's really what I'm gonna try and do with Footsteps. And I recognize that making a good RPG is more challenging than making an FPS. So I want to start out with 00 because it's much easier to break into as a person who hasn't developed games. And obviously before I do this, I'm going to be participating in game jams, working with teams of other people, learning what common mistakes are and going through all that, and then I'll get into development of 00. But Footsteps RPG, right? But the reason that I'm thinking about having 00 be some kind of like, I definitely want you to be a spy. Absolutely. It's a spy, short levels, all about like being slower and more accurate, rewarding that, punishing you for rushing and being less accurate, teaching you how to be more focused, right? Because I personally found that games like GoldenEye and Perfect Dark have really, really, really helped me slow my mind down and teach me how to focus, because for so long I just had so much trouble with that, right? But the reason that I think I want an FPS or the 00 to be more like wizardry or some kind of fantasy setting is because if I do this right, I can create games that create the data needed to create another game that's unrelated that's even better, right? So let's use the the training room as an example of this. You could make a whole mobile game that is just target practice with different guns, and you have some kind of system to make that fun and interesting and rewarding, right? And then once you've made that game, that can be its own existence, right? But then you use that to be like, okay, Now I've used this to test out what weapons have fun combinations. I've used this and I really understand, like, okay, this is a feature that works well with guns. This feature doesn't work well with guns. This screws me, this doesn't screw me. It creates an environment that you can then use. And then from that point, all right, you in a video game have an FPS environment where you can shoot things, you can have different weapons, right? So at this point, it's very easy to then use that to progress to a first-person shooter with a storyline or a campaign, right? So imagine that you do that and you go through all these missions, and then you have if it's a fantasy-based mechanism, well then you have a FPS system of magic combined with RPG elements, right? I really want to go away from standard leveling systems and have the games that I work on be more about your actual skill, because that's something that I really feel is lacking in a lot of video games. Most video games now exist with archetypes that were created by particular individual games that were leagues ahead of their time and then have just been copied over and over again and not advanced, right? And this is true for much of society, but particularly true in video games. One really innovative publisher will do something new and really change things, and then most other publishers will just copy that over and over and over again for years. And a great example of this, and this gets into my ultimate ambition with video game development, is World of Warcraft. Because World of Warcraft set the bar for massively online role-playing games. So when you're talking about an MMO like World of Warcraft, for those of you who are new to this kind of stuff, that is a game that typically has a server, multiple servers, and each server has between maybe 20 and 2,000 people registered to it who can play on it at any given time and interact with one another. And that's where that massive multiplayer part comes in from. It's not like a typical multiplayer game where you're playing with 2 or 3 or 4 other people. It is a massively multiplayer online game, right? So the thing is, World of Warcraft got big. Everybody, if you know video games, you've heard of World of Warcraft, right? But it got big because it had systems that worked, and it provided an experience for the first time to whole generations of people who'd never experienced that before. And it provided them a sense of community when they were alone in their life, and or felt they were alone. And it's crazy, but my point is that World of Warcraft got big. And at that point, MMOs have not gotten past World of Warcraft. There are so many MMOs now, and they are literally reskins of World of Warcraft. They take everything that World of Warcraft made big. I'm not saying World of Warcraft came up with these dynamics, but I am saying that World of Warcraft made these dynamics big. And one in particular that I don't like is the dynamic of a tank, a healer, and a damager. That obviously is something that's in Dungeons and Dragons and is like a core at a multiplayer RPG, right? That's really, really important. But when it comes to World of Warcraft, like, the reason that that's important is because it encourages people and incentivizes them to play and work together. And understanding that is critical, because most games, most MMOs that get created, instead of being like, all right, we don't need the tank damage, we don't need that system. That's not what's important. What is important is that we have some system in place that encourages people to play together, to coordinate. That develops community, and that ultimately is the most powerful thing that an MMO will do. That is what makes a good MMO, is the MMO's ability to work with players to generate communities that exist in this digital world of real people from real life who don't know each other, right? So the trouble is that so many things are just being copied, and instead of understanding why it is that this mechanic is necessary and thinking about how we can replace it, most developers just copy the mechanic itself. And as a mechanic gets used more and more and more and more, it becomes less effective. There was a period of time where the World of Warcraft experience would blow your mind, right? But the reality is now that most gamers have already experienced something like that. So in order to have that kind of huge explosion of interest in a particular game again, games will have to be more creative and figure out why these original mechanics existed, and then apply new mechanics to accomplish the tasks even more efficiently, right? And so here is why this is my ultimate ambition, and that is to create an MMO. And the reason that I want to create an MMO is because I don't believe that there is anything that I can do in my time on this earth before I die that will influence as many people in a positive way as creating an MMO. And that's just because as a video game developer, obviously, like, I want to create art, I want to create stories, and I want to create games where people can play them and apply what they learn to make their life in real life better. That is the key for me, is that I don't want to create environments that people just want to escape in for all the rest of their lives. What I want is to create environments that maybe for a period of time people want to escape in. But by thriving in that digital environment, you learn how to thrive in real life, whether you realize it or not. And that is really what I want to be unique about the games that I work on, is really think about, okay, how is this going to translate into the player's life? And the main thing here is money. So this is the concept of the MMO that I want to ultimately work on. And keep in mind, this is probably 10, 20 years from now. This is at a point where I have made multiple video games. I have met tons of people who develop games. I have an established YouTube presence about video games. This is way in the future when I have loads of experience with games. There is absolutely no way I would consider getting into an MMO straight away. But the idea here is that you create an MMO, right? And we won't get into the nitty-gritty of what the MMO will look like. The thing that's unique is that you find players who gain some kind of reputation within the worlds, right? And in any MMO, there's players who stand out. There's players who are known for being like really mean or being really nice or really powerful, right? There's names on each individual server. People get a reputation, okay? And so the big distinction here is that you use the people's reputation in the game to determine what the game becomes. And you do this by incentivizing people who gain a reputation by paying them. So you pay certain players to play the game the way that they play the game. You figure out, okay, this person is giving experiences to other players. And that's really what you want, because the biggest problem with MMOs, for me, is the inactivity, the lack of interaction with the game world. MMOs still exist as kind of an illusion of a world, but they don't properly incentivize you to feel like you exist within the world. They want you to get to the end, or they want you to get to this particular item. They do little tricks that make it temporarily look like you're into the world, but you're really not, right? But if we populate this world with actual people who are playing in their own ways and are actively being paid, and know that most players know that. They know that if they play this game and if they get a reputation, they can get hired to play the game. I think will cause a huge level of immersion if done properly. And the thing here is, it can't just be like a full-time gig. You can't just have like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna pay you to play 40 hours a week, yada yada, because that's not how it works. You have to always boil it down to, this person is really enjoying the game. They are playing it in a particular way where they are interacting with a lot of other people, because interaction with people is what causes success in an MMO. So how do we incentivize them? How do we pay them in a way that doesn't stop them from enjoying the game? It can't become their job. But so what I think we can do is have these short gigs where we have a rolling number of payments going out, right? So at any given moment, okay, there's like 100 or 200 players per week that are being paid, and they're on a gig for 2 weeks, and they're paid an amount of money to play the game. And they're literally not told a specific way to play it. It's based on data from how they're interacting with people and the experiences that they're being a part of. As long as the game can see that they're doing that in a way that is favorable for long-term engagement with the game, then I can reward these people through money from subscription for the MMO. I can reward them with money because I know that they are playing the game in a way that makes it actively more interesting. And then that can be on a rolling basis, right? Because we want as many people to experience this as possible, but also in a way that doesn't detach them from the game itself, right? So the only way to accomplish that, I think, is to have these be short-term gigs where you can trigger it, and then for 2 weeks you get paid to play it. And then after those 2 weeks, that slot goes to somebody else. But over time, you can trigger it more and more often, right? So you're rewarded for the regularity, where it's not like, okay, hey, we're going to try and hire you, and then you're going to do this 30, 40 days a week. It's going to be like, no, you're just playing the game. So you're going to get money for how you were already showing a pattern of playing the game and continuing that, right? And the important thing here is, don't get me wrong, I'm not traditional. I'm not going to be like, all right, this person is being really friendly, they're doing really great things, they got a good guild going on, they're helping people out, I'm going to pay them. I didn't say interact in a positive way. I just said interact with other players. And here's where it gets really, really interesting, because I really think that there is huge future for experimenting with unfairness in MMOs in particular. This comes from something I observed when I played World of Warcraft, and this goes against MMOs. Like, anybody will tell you that all MMOs, you have to start out equal to all other players. Anytime you don't, people really hate that. Like when you have paid services that give you bonuses, huge outbursts. People do not like that, okay? The whole point of an MMO is your life may be crappy sometimes, but at least you can start this game and be a fresh slate and have the same opportunity as everybody, right? So don't get me wrong, I understand that. I'm not saying I'm trying to change that, but I am definitely interested in having some people get lucky when they spawn their character, and other people less lucky. And I'm interested in that because of the tensions that this will form. I want there to be factions in this game, but not factions like, all right, you gotta pick if you're an orc or an ogre, and the ogres hate the orcs, and yeah, I don't want to make it that simple. What I want is people to be jealous of other players. I want them to have active reason to work against each other, but be actively rewarded if they are kind, right? But to make it look like that's not what's going on here, because that translates to real life, right? There's a lot of things that you can do that'll help yourself in the moment, but in the long run, you're saying no to an infinite access to everything you need, which is what happens when you get integrated in a community that shares your interests, right? So that's always going to be the goal. But really, these thoughts all came from a time when I was playing World of Warcraft, and it was after the Death Knights. So for those of you who don't know World of Warcraft, there's classes, different classes that you can play, right? You know, this is pretty typical in an RPG. You may have like a hunter, a warrior, a shaman, a healer, a mage, a wizard, all that kind of stuff, right? And each of them have different abilities. So in World of Warcraft, there were like 7 or 8, I don't remember how many, and then they unleashed these new things called hero classes. And a hero class is something that is stronger than other classes, and you can unlock it by getting to a certain level, right? So in World of Warcraft, max level was 60 or 70, 70 I guess, and if you got a character to 60, then you could unlock a Death Knight. And so then you could spawn a Death Knight, and from the very beginning, Death Knights spawn at level 55, and then have a campaign that takes them to level 58 and decks them out in really good gear. And it makes them fucking strong. Much stronger than other players at that level who've played the game up until that point. And there was a real tension created by this. And I thought that was so absolutely fascinating that in World of Warcraft, there existed a racism against Death Knights. There were people, a large percentage of people, I'm not saying a majority, but there were enough people who were so frustrated by Death Knights that they would actively not play with them. They considered Death Knights noobs and unfair. And it was just so fascinating to me to observe how this thing that this game developer had tweaked, this change that they had made, had created actual tensions against a character. Just like in real life, how if you're born a certain way, you are going to be stereotyped. And if you are average, you will become the thing you are stereotyped as simply by giving into the stereotype force against you. And I want that to be evident in this MMO. I want it to be a situation where there's going to be these forces. There's going to be things that get you angry and frustrated, but also mechanisms to work together. And there's going to be the ability to earn real life money through playing this video game. And I know that that is going to open so many opportunities for just thinking about how big that audience could be, how far that influence could stretch. Like, okay, let's show you guys some numbers. So World of Warcraft at its peak. How many players did World of Warcraft had? 12 million subscribers. Okay, and that's subscribers. So instead of saying active subscribers, let's look at how many the most players logged into WoW at once. Okay, we're gonna have to go with the subscription count. That's okay. Okay, so World of Warcraft had over 100 million accounts created and over 12 million active subscribers. No, yeah, 12 million active subscribers at its peak, right? So let's look at countries by population. If we think of the players of World of Warcraft as a country, and keep in mind, this isn't people who just logged into the game once. This is active subscribers. So at its peak, Walmart had 12 million people. Okay? That puts World of Warcraft as a country at, let's see. Here we go. The 76th largest country by population in the world, with more people playing World of Warcraft than people existing in Rwanda, Tunisia, Cuba, Belgium, Benin, Greece, Bolivia, Haiti, Bermuda, Dominican Republic, Czech Republic, Portugal, Sweden, Hungary, Jordan, Belarus, United Arab Emirates, Honduras, Tajikistan, Serbia, Austria, Switzerland, Israel. Look at all these. Every single one of these countries has less people in it than the number of people who were actively paying for World of Warcraft at its peak. And to understand this is absolutely mind-blowing. And this is one of the many reasons that I am convinced that video games are going to play a huge role in society. And I don't think that virtual reality is the direction that's going to change that. A lot of people think that virtual reality is like the next big thing and that everyone's just going to want to escape into these worlds and never live their real lives and we're all going to matrix it up. I don't think that that's what's going to end up happening. Obviously, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure people are always going to want to like enjoy their real life. I think that while games and that concept is good for people who don't like their lives, it doesn't make any sense why you would shut yourself in a fantasy world all the time when you will be at your most happiest when you have a balance in your life and you also find joy in your life and you don't want to be away from it for that long. Ultimately, like, it's not going to be that simple, right? And virtual reality is something I'm particularly not super interested in, just because of mobile phones are everywhere. If you look at the amount of humans that have access to mobile phones, it's huge. Virtual reality, not so much. Obviously, like, basic virtual reality at this point, like, even in a place like Nicaragua, people here have experienced virtual reality to some point, but it's not common. Having a smartphone is common here. Most of the people I know, most of the local friends that I have, they have smartphones. Most people here don't have a personal computer, but they do have some form of smartphone. Like, even to the point where the parks here have free Wi-Fi, specifically for that reason. Here, you don't, like, have these monthly contracts with phone companies. You have, like, pay-as-you-go services with 4G through Claro and Movistar and that kind of thing. But it's really fascinating. And to me, you can reach more people through cell phones, way more people than you can through virtual reality. And eventually, virtual reality will be more common, but the way that I see the world, I want to access as many people as I possibly can. So I really have to understand that if I make a game and I focus it on virtual reality, really the only people who will be playing that are existing passionate gamers who like virtual reality. And that is already a smaller subset of existing gamers. What I want is as many people as possible, right? So that's why I know that making games for cell phones is going to be probably something I'm more interested in than virtual reality. But not saying I don't like virtual reality. I just don't think that it's as, like, in life, things tend to play out in ways that you don't expect. And common knowledge is often wrong. And common knowledge for virtual reality is that it's this concept of it's going to be like the Matrix eventually. What I've learned about life is that if common knowledge says it, and it's a particular laid out plan, it's probably not going to end up that way. But at this point, I've rambled on enough, and I have now touched on the basics, the core of my interests in video game development. And so now you guys have a better understanding of what I'm talking about when I say that that is my core interest, not dropshipping, you know. Dropshipping just plays a role in making that happen, okay? And now I'm done. I've talked long enough. I will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you like this content. And, yeah, comment below. I always love to talk about this stuff. See you next time. Bye.